No worries. Thanks very much, Johnny. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks very much for giving up some of your time on this beautiful summer evening to have a little look at designing for the human mind. So, what we'll look at this evening is, very briefly how our brains make sense of the things around us, including some magical examples. And we'll also explore how, as researchers and designers, we can make use of this to provide a better experience for our customers or clients. But before we dive in, a little bit about me. So I work for Bunnyfoot, one of Johnny's colleagues. We're a team of 27 psychologists, UX researchers, usability specialists, and service designers. We've been around for quite a long time, about 21 years now. And I'm a user experience researcher and interaction design consultant. But basically, I've spent a lot of time doing usability testing amongst a lot of other methodologies. I've done work in IA and wireframing and prototyping, interaction design, and all of that. And some of my recent clients are EDF, HSBC, Canada Life, and Sky. And when I'm not doing all of that kind of stuff, in my spare time, I love a bit of gaming and a bit of sci-fi. But primarily these days, I'm a dad, and I do a lot less gaming and sci-fi watching than I used to. But that's no bad thing because it's not good to neglect your children, also they say. Anyway, we've got quite a lot to get through this evening, so let's have a look at the basics of the human mind. All right, so to keep you on your toes this evening, as Johnny mentioned, we're going to do a few polls as we go through. So let's try this out now. I'm going to start the first poll, see what happens. So according to neuroscientist Paul D. McLean, how many brains do we have? 1, 2, or 3? So there's going to be a little bit of a lag. Yeah, we've got a couple coming in. Oh, they're flooding in now. Oh, it's just like being back in the pub doing a pub quiz, isn't it? All right, so we have got most people have said, oh, lots more. I feel like I'm giving a running commentary on a race. All right, I'm going to pause there. So the winning answer is 2 brains with 46% of the vote. But the answer is actually, according to Dr. McLean, that the brain has 3 distinct parts, with the speed of response being the main differentiator. So let's have a look at these. First of all, you've got your reptilian brain, and this was evolved a very, very long time ago, and it is a super fast response, 0.01 seconds, and that's really for fight or flight reactions. For example, if a dog barks at you, and then after that, you've got your amygdala, for processing of emotions and instincts. And then you've got, after that, the neo-mammalian brain, which is actually pretty recently evolved, only to 2-3 million years ago, and that's much slower. That's 5 times slower than your limbic system, your paleomammalian brain. And it's really just used for sort of slow, high-level functions and justifying the decisions that have already been made. So most of us humans, we like to think that our decisions are rational and conscious and sensible, but actually most of our behavior, including the complex behavior, is non-conscious or subconscious. So in this image we've got here, we have a driver and rider on an elephant, and frankly, if the elephant wants to go to the right, it will go to the right. So the driver, which is the example of consciousness in this case, might think that they're in control and can occasionally influence the elephant. But realistically, when the elephant goes right with its own accord, the driver doesn't really have much choice, and it might even change their mind to think they wanted to go right in the first place. So really, the driver thinks they're in control, but actually they're just along for the ride. And that's just like you and me. The unconscious is much more powerful than the conscious. So a good real life example, getting a bit political. This is our sort of conscious side, the spin doctor, spinning reality. I'll never lie to you. You have my word on that, said Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary. But then the unconscious is the fire-spitting chaos behind the scenes, the Donald Trump there, a good example. So the takeaway from all this is that, our unconscious decision making, which is, done at lightning speed, means that the brain sometimes gets things wrong. And so we can easily be confused or distracted or misled. And sometimes we even make up imaginary experiences to compensate for loss of memory. So remember, all of our experiences depend on the brain, and we need to be aware of that fact, and that's what we are designing for above all else. So let's crack on and have a look at how we see. So I think I used to imagine the brain kind of worked like this picture. So we have a visual model that's like a sort of a cinema screen, but the truth is it doesn't work like that at all. Processing visual information actually happens in 3 different stages. You can see there I've mapped them for you. You've got the retina, the midbrain, and the cerebral cortex. And the point of this slide is, partly to show how it happens, what the visual pathway is. But we don't have time to go into it this evening. But I really just wanted to sort of convey to you how complex all of this is. And the complexity of the visual pathway and the way we process visual information is so complex, it can easily go wrong or be tricked. And due to the way that we process visual information, many of our perceptions and decisions, in fact, the whole way we view the world is out of our conscious control. So your users couldn't tell you why or how they experience something in a particular way, even if you asked them. You can only get an understanding of human behavior by observing what people do and how they do it, and by understanding how our brains, minds, and perceptions work. So let's have a look at some fun examples. And these illusions just show you that if you understand the visual system, you can mess with it and create some images that'll have certain effects. So we process familiar images top down. So we tend to see the whole first and only analyze the details later. So if you look at this image, your unconscious processing tells you about the elephant first and about the issue with how many legs it has much later on. Hopefully you've all spotted that the legs are really weird, and you probably can't count how many there are. And have a look at this image now for a few seconds. So if your eyes follow the movement of that rotating dot, the dots will only remain in one color, which is pink or lilac. But if you stare at that black cross in the center, what do you see? I hope that you should find that that moving dot turns green. And then if you spend a few moments really concentrating on that black cross in the center of the picture, all the pink dots will slowly disappear and you will only see a single green dot rotating. And it's quite amazing how our brain works, because there really is no green dot and the pink dots don't really disappear. And this should be proof enough that we don't always see what we think we do. So let's dig in a bit about how our eyes focus. So the picture on the left, those circles show the receptive fields of the rods and cones at different parts of the retina. So your eyes at the back are made up of a mix of rods, which are really good at perceiving movement and see light and dark and work at low light levels, but they don't really see color. And cones, which do perceive color, but only work above certain light levels, which is why you don't really see color in the dark. However, right in the middle at the back, in the fovea, there are only cones, and they're really tightly packed. And so you can see color and really high detail in this bit. It's about 2 to 3 degrees of a visual angle. So, it's a window with high detail equivalent to about holding a satsuma at your arm's length. And as you move out, the spacing increases. So you see in less and less detail, and there are fewer cones and more rods. So as an evolutionary trait, being able to spot a saber-toothed tiger hiding in the bushes out of the corner of your eye was pretty useful, but it does mean we are extremely prone to distraction. So what does this mean for us as designers? Well, it's important to use peripheral vision to add context or help orientate your users, but you do need to be very careful about using flashing or blinking or movement to avoid distracting the user from the main message of your page. But we'll look at that in a bit more detail later. So, pre-attentive coding. Well, look, understanding the visual system means that you can design for it. And here we're going to look at using pre-attentive properties to help do that. So what are pre-attentive properties? Well, these are visual features that are analyzed by different areas of the brain early on in visual processing. And here are some examples. You've got color, position, form, and motion. And as designers, using them, we can make sure that the information is processed more efficiently and pop into attention better. And there's a whole book on this by Colin Ware called Information Visualization. And if you just have a quick scan of that page, you don't really have to think very much to see incredibly quickly the difference in the color, in the position of the objects, in what form they are, and the fact that some of them are moving and some aren't. And this pre-attentive processing is really useful when you need to surface key information at a glance. And it's used often in things like data analysis and graphs and dashboards. So if you ever need your users to pick things up very quickly or understand data, this is the part of your human perception that you'll be using. And here are a few more examples of pre-attentive attributes. You've got orientation, size, intensity, line width, length, and curvature, some added marks, and enclosure. But they're not all equal. Some of these are more pre-attentively coded than others. So, for example, car indicators work really well because motion is a really strong pre-attentive quality. They wouldn't work very well if they just stayed a constant orange. We wouldn't notice them and they'd be confused with things like stoplights. But just one cautionary point, be careful not to go completely overboard because it can actually become annoying if you use it too much. So yeah, use sparingly for maximum impact. So now to mix it up a bit, we are going to look at a video. I'm going to pause that there because I need to do it in the browser. So one moment while I switch it over for you. Hopefully this should work for you. So, right, enough of that. So you can see there, hopefully from that video, how powerful the principles of perception are. Because even though you can see they've, naturally these are people with legs, you're sort of inclined to group together the colors rather than the legs themselves. And this is a good example of the unconscious overriding the conscious, even when you know what's happening. It's still difficult to see. So let's move along from how we see to how we read, and based on that, how we can improve our written content. So as Nathaniel Hawthorne once said quite correctly, easy reading is damn hard writing. So let's learn about it a little bit. So we looked a little bit earlier about the sort of physiology of the eye. So images are projected on the back of the eye to the retina. And in the center of the retina, there's that small region where you get maximum focus and contrast called the fovea. And then everything outside of that focus is increasingly blurred. And you can see that from the image there. But we don't read smoothly or in lines. Actually, our eyes dart around the page in quick jumps, and it stops just long enough to take a quick snapshot and pick up a few words. And the jumps are called saccades, and the pauses are called fixations. Now, saccades are pretty quick. They usually take 20 to 35 milliseconds. Most of them are forward movements from 7 to 9 letters, but then 10 to 15% of saccades are regressive or backwards movements. And if any of you have got access to eye tracking technology, you can see there's a picture there. You can see the saccades are the sort of lines, and then the fixations are those red dots where the person is hovering over the words to pick up what is being said. And the brain controls our eyes so that each movement is absolutely optimized to capture that next batch of information that's missing. And on average, you'll read about 15% of a line of text at a time. So why is all this important to know? Well, a large space between the words will reduce the number of words that are captured in each fixation. And so to compensate, the eye has to make more fixations per line. So, and that's more tiring. So it's important to check the word spacing in your copy. And as a general sort of rule, the optimum spacing to enable the brain to identify words while avoiding the large saccades that make reading more difficult is around 140% of the font size. So, I mean, anything from 120 to 200% is okay. 140 is about generally the sweet spot, but play around with your text to see what looks right. And just a note on justification. So newspapers and other media that use narrow columns will often use justification, and that's where you align the column edges. This should be avoided because it creates those rivers of white space in the text. And it also increases the word spacing to make the lines of text the same length. And so unsurprisingly, you can see the stat there. Researchers found about a 10% increase in reading time with justified text. So yeah, less of that, if you please. So I am historically, when I was much younger, I studied languages, and language is very dear to my heart. So when I come across to talk about the inverted pyramid, I get quite excited. This is really important to me. And if you haven't come across it before, it's basically, it's just a sort of a reminder here that people tend to scan web pages for key information rather than reading everything in detail word by word. So it's essential to front load each element within your copy. And when I say front load, I mean place the most important information first. So when writing about a topic, you may be used to starting with an introduction, then gradually building to your conclusion at the end. But to write effectively for the web, you need to do the opposite. You've got to be super direct, make your point first, and then explain it afterwards. And you need to be front-loading your article. So you can do this by writing a brief summary or overview of your content in a few sentences. And then within that, you include your most important keywords in the summary and put it at the beginning of the article. And that will help users quickly assess what the page is about and help search engines identify your most important keywords. And then front load your headings. So you start your headings with the most significant words first, rather than generic terms to catch the eye of your reader. And then the heading should also reflect the topic of that section so that your readers can skim the headings and scan the content for relevant points of interest. And finally, front load your paragraphs. So each paragraph should be about a single main point or idea. and you start the paragraph with that main point, and then you go on to explain it. So then readers can skim the entire content of the page, get an overview just by reading the first sentence or two of each paragraph. So yeah, if you want users to be really engaged with your content, the inverted pyramid is a really good place to start. So we're going to have a quick poll just to check that everyone's still more or less awake and with me. And I want you to have a quick read of this paragraph, and then I will start the poll. So once you've read it, I've put the poll live. How easy or difficult was it to understand the information on the reading versus writing slide? Anything from very easy right up to very difficult. It's all anonymous, so no one will find out how easy or difficult you found it. Yeah, the answers are starting to come in now. It's interesting. The suspense is building. I'll give it another 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Well, most people said they found this information difficult to understand. And that's actually, I mean, I totally agree. I think it would only be easy to understand if you're a scientist or a statistician, or you've come across, two-way analysis of variance before. So the reason this is here is that it's not just enough to make your text legible. You have to ensure that you speak a language that your customers will understand. And one of the most common mistakes that companies make on their websites is to use business language that their customers are not familiar with. And we've all been there. You've been at a company for ages, and you start off and there are all these acronyms. You've got no idea what they mean, but after 6 months, your brain is making all of these shortcuts, and you say, oh yeah, well, now I kind of understand what that is. But the problem is that when you start to explain to people outside of your organization what you're talking about, you fall back on that jargon. And if you convey that sort of business jargon to your customers, it adds an unnecessary burden to their brain, because they're not only having to process all that sensory input from what they can see on the page, but also have to decode that jargon that they won't be familiar with. So if possible, use language that is very simple, that everyone can understand, and not just stakeholders in your company. So have a look at these two web pages. At first glance, which do you think is better? I hope everyone thought the second one, or the one on the right, because there's just some tips here about how to make content easily digestible. Bullet points to your friends. Frequently see this when designing for clients. There's a temptation to write out long and complex answers, because some of the problems or services that are being delivered are quite complicated. But time and time again, users just don't read them. Whereas in bullet points, everything is broken down into manageable chunks that's much more digestible. Use clear and unambiguous labels and headers. Take away all distractions. Have a single journey per page, and just one final CTA. I said CTA, call to action. There you go. Acronyms, they just creep in. All right, how we notice things. Let's move on to the next section. The modern day sage, Homer Simpson. Absolutely. So in this section, we are going to look at how to grab and direct attention, particularly looking at the concept of selective attention. So how do we get users' attention? Well, there are a few key things that grab people's attention very effectively. And there are many ways you can talk about them, but I like to talk about them like this. Can I eat it? Will it eat me? Can I have sex with it? And these questions all work so well because they're strongly linked to the reptilian part of the brain. And marketing have been very clever in using this to their advantage for years. And here are some examples of the 3 Fs: food, fear, and sex, all very effective. And it's not just marketers, also the Daily Mail, classic examples here. You've got housing benefit ban on jobless migrants. You've got Lady Mary's cleavage, and you've got some information about sugar at the top. So no wonder they sell so many papers. They've got the 3 Fs right there on their front pages. Very effective indeed. And there are a few more things that as humans we are hardwired to pay attention to. Things like movement. We've talked about peripheral movement already. Food and sex, danger, loud noises, faces, especially when they're looking at you, your own name, and stories. And you can use all of these to good effect in your designs. So let's have a look at some more ways to grab attention. So look carefully and tell me which of these coins is the odd one out. That is a rhetorical question. So the brain knows that it has limited resources and therefore decides what things it really needs to pay attention to and which it can ignore. So you probably just looked quite closely at that odd one out and started to ignore everything else when you saw that it wasn't relevant. So people tend only to pay attention to the attributes they need to complete the task at hand, and they ignore everything else, which brings us nicely to the concept of selective attention. So this is when someone is paying attention to one thing and filtering out all other distracting stimuli. And the ability to do this depends a bit on the type of task they're involved in. So let's have a look at these examples here. In that first image, the Amazon page, your attention's grabbed pretty easily through the large images, the use of color, and the large font sizes. And in that second image, the user's probably having to concentrate pretty hard on the task in hand and to filter out the other distractions. So yeah, if you want people to have a nice, good usable experience, try and make sure that they don't have to filter out too many, competing things for their attention and just focus on the task in hand. So to mix things up again, here's a video for you, which I'm going to switch over to now. Let's have a look at this.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Sorry, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
Well, there is a actually pretty good, I thought, YouTube video from TfL, but it's just a really good reminder of everything that can go on when you really focus on something. Lots of things can happen around you without you really even noticing. So let's have a look at how we make decisions as time is moving on. So we're just going to have a very quick look at one of the sort of basic concepts of persuasion design. And as the wonderful Nelson Mandela pointed out quite rightly, it's wise to persuade people to do things and make them think it was their own idea. Absolutely right. Everyone's pleased when they think that the idea was theirs. But what is persuasion? So I'm actually going to open the poll quickly, and I'm not sure if this is going to work, but I've opened a poll saying, how would you define persuasion? And if you've got any thoughts on how you would define persuasion, I'd be very interested to hear it. And if I get no responses, that hasn't worked very well. But I'll just give it 30 seconds and see. Oh, got a response. Couple of responses coming in. Seven responses. Okay, lots of responses. So well, I have a big apology due to my own failure to work out how to actually do this. I've just got a few in there, and see if I can close the poll and get the responses. I literally haven't been able to do that. Forgive me, that's not actually worked very well. But anyway, that's actually human error, so forgive me on that one. I need to get better with that kind of polling, clearly. Anyway, thank you very much for everyone who answered. I'm sure you did a bang-up job. But actually, the definition of persuasion is to cause someone to agree with a belief or course of action by using arguments or earnest request. So, for example, she persuaded us that she can indeed communicate with the dead, or he persuaded his teachers to grant an extension. But if you look at the synonyms there, actually quite a few of them are pretty negative. You've got things like brainwashing and working over and hard sell and arm twist and wheedling. So the question is, is persuasion, when it comes to design, ethical? And is it compatible with a good customer experience? Well, the answer is yes, provided there are benefits for the business and the customer. But it can be a bit difficult to persuade people to do things they wouldn't otherwise do. So now this poll we're going to do again, I'm pretty confident this is going to work. So how much would you pay for one of these jars of coffee? So I'm now going to start the poll on that one. So how much would you pay for one of these jars of coffee? You've got £2.50 to £4.99, a fiver to £7.49, or £7.50 to £14.99. Okay, brilliant. All right, well, pretty much 90% of you, now going down to 80, basically it's about 83% of you said you would do the first option, which is £2.50 to £4.99. So this is a jar of premium coffee. The jar costs about £5, and it makes 40 or so coffees. So has anyone got one of these, a coffee pod machine at home? Nespresso or any other brand will do. Well, pods for this cost about 40p each, which is the equivalent of about £16 for that jar of coffee. So why on earth are these so popular? You would not pay £16 for a jar of coffee, but Nespresso isn't framed against that. It's framed against a single cup experience, such as Costa and Starbucks. So therefore, you are getting a £3 Starbucks experience or Costa experience for 40p, which is a bargain. So this just reminds us that our perceptions and behaviors are fluid. They're not fixed. And what we've just looked at is a good example of what's called the framing effect. And another example of this is when you go onto Wikipedia and they liken the small donation they request to the cup of coffee you think nothing of buying each day. So it frames their request in such a way as to make you think, Yeah, that's not very much money. It's only a coffee. Why not? I'll give £2. And it's very effective. And so another example, a digital one, is that it's known that when customers are offered higher priced versions of products first, they'll be more willing to buy the cheaper version shown later. So this screenshot shows a digital version of this where the VIP subscription is shown first at £18, making customers more likely to feel they're getting a good bargain by choosing the unlimited subscription package for £8.50 a month. So it is worth remembering that when you are out shopping or browsing the web, you are having your own unconscious biases used against you. Well, that is coming up against time. So I really hope that you enjoyed finding out a little bit more about this and you've realized that your unconscious is usually in control, even if you think it isn't. If you did have a good time, you thought some of this was interesting stuff, fear not. We have proper training courses. We've got 3 internationally recognized UX qualifications, and you can become a certified UX practitioner, which is assessed by the UXQB. There's the CPUX Foundation course. There's a user testing course and for user requirements. And we also have carefully structured UX training. So everything from the basics like UX fundamentals through to strategy research and also understanding and defining requirements. Today, we mainly looked at designing for usability and human perception, but we also touched on designing for persuasion, emotion, and trust. And there's also stuff about delivery. So that's all we've got time